Christmas edition of Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Network. Locked On Dolphins, Locked On Bucs, Dolphins Buck Week 17. We'll get your preview rolling here today on Crossover Thursday.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Network. I'm Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins, joined by James Yarcho, host of Locked On Bucs. This Prize Picks Crossover Thursday, getting you ready for Week 17 action between two teams from the Sunshine State who are in the thick of it right now, respectively. So we'll get you ready for this contest between the Bucs and Dolphins. Crossover Thursday is presented by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Special thank you to everyone who has helped make the Locked On Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. James, we don't get a chance to do these very often, you and I. Maybe a preseason one every now and again, but at least that hasn't been the case lately. How are things going?
The Sunshine State is just a cloud of darkness. I think outside of Jacksonville,
Right, south
it's
of Duval.
it's a cloud of darkness. It's a season that started with the Bucs being 6-2. They're #1 in power rankings. They're being talked about as Super Bowl contenders. Baker's an odds-on favorite to win the MVP, and now they're 7-8, and they have to win this game. They have to win their next two in order to try to make the playoffs. If the Dolphins win and Carolina pulls off an upset against the Seattle Seahawks, that's it. Carolina clinches. So this is do or die time for the Buccaneers.
Yeah, and I know you and I talked a little bit about in the pre-show about a pair of head coaches that might be feeling some warm seats underneath of them as well. That the ship has already sailed on the postseason talk. Miami made an admirable comeback from kind of the inverse of what Tampa Bay did to start the season, where Miami just 1-6, could not get anything rolling early. And there was a lot of roster turnover. There was a lot of talk about culture reset. Some of their biggest players missed most of or all of last year, so there was some rust. The passing game never really got rolling. Tyreek Hill goes down in week 4. So a whole bunch of compounding variables. And then they kind of found their stride by getting back to Mike McDaniel's roots in the run game. They get back to 6-7. They lose on Monday Night Football to Pittsburgh. They're mathematically eliminated for the postseason. And man, did it snowball against Cincinnati this past week. And that's the worry for Miami when you think about the big picture stories and conversations that are taking place in Miami right now. 45 points given up and really struggling offensively after the first half to get anything consistently rolling, with Quinn Ewers making his first career NFL start. You're paying a quarterback on a second contract and you sit him down. Like, that's where things are for Miami. So Mike McDaniel needs his team to keep playing strong for him. And they did not finish last week strong. And that's kind of created this very uneasy feeling about what these next 2 weeks could be for the Dolphins.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting situation there in Miami. I mean, I've always been a fan of Mike McDaniel. I got the chance to see him when the Bucs and Dolphins did a joint practice at training camp a couple of years ago, and that was kind of when he was at his peak with Miami. And he's this young, energetic dude, and he's having fun out there. But all that fun was kind of taken away by Brady disappearing for 10 days during that training camp. But yeah, it's not at all the season that I expected from Miami. And of course, beyond the coaching questions, now you have the quarterback questions too. You thought, Tua is going to be the long-term guy. You said he got that second contract, and all of a sudden he's on the bench. Tyreek is posting memes on Twitter about it, and it becomes a huge mess. But I look at this Dolphins team and I think, they still have a ton of talent. They still have a lot of really, really solid pieces that a lot of coaches would love to have, on their teams, in their locker rooms. So I don't really know. I'm interested to kind of follow along and see what happens here, because it's not a situation that I thought really either of our teams would be in going into this offseason.
Yeah, I think for Miami, the biggest problem and the biggest culprit in this is already out in Chris Grier, the general manager. I think too much of their money went to the wrong people and players. And that's where I think my expectation for Tua Tagovailoa was kind of maybe not the highest of ceilings, but a relatively high floor. You know what you're going to get. Alex Smith type of quarterback that is going to give you a certain level of consistency and competency. And then the question is, well, do you have a breakthrough against the better teams on your schedule? And instead, he's regressed in some ways. And the Dolphins' offense has regressed in ways. I think where you feel Tyreek Hill's absence most is on third and long and late downs, just because the spacing is a little bit more constricted. Teams are playing a lot of landmark zone, and that was part of the change to Quinn was, hey, maybe we can get some throws outside the numbers. Hey, maybe we can loosen up defenses a little bit. Maybe we can create a little bit more space with a little bit more threat to access more of the field. So it's one of the great variables and wild cards of this matchup. And I would imagine that a veteran coach like Todd Bowles is probably looking forward on hitting some pressure packages against a young quarterback to see how he responds. I'd love to hear from you, James, as far as the temperature around Todd Bowles and what his situation is like, just because I know obviously taking over from Bruce Arians and the success that they had early in his coaching tenure. And now it's kind of like Mike McDaniel, right? Where like the deeper you get into it, you kind of start to ask yourself some questions about, okay, what are the warts? Are they getting better? Are they worse? Are they going away? What's that conversation like with Todd Bowles right now?
I think with Todd Bowles, it's, even if you win this game against Miami and you win next week against Carolina and you find yourself in the postseason, that postseason appearance is still not going to save Todd Bowles' job. It's become that dire. And this Bucs ownership group, the Glazier family, they have fired better coaches for less. Tony Dungy got fired because he couldn't get past the Eagles in the postseason, and they felt that they had reached their ceiling. And you take a look at all of the struggles that the Buccaneers have had this year. A lot of them have been injury related, right? You lose Cody Mauch for the entire season. You start the year without Tristan Wirfs and without Chris Godwin. You get those guys back just to turn around and lose Chris again after you've already lost Mike again to a broken collarbone. End the streak. You lose Bucky for 2 months. Baker's playing with a dislocated shoulder, an oblique injury, a knee injury. Yeah, he's battling through it. You lose your other starting guard in Ben Bredeson. It's been just nightmare after nightmare on the injury front on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, you lost Kalijah Kancey, and you've missed guys for one game here, one game there. But for the most part, this defense has been intact, and they've been the weaker unit. And when you have a head coach that is in charge of that side of the ball that is consistently being beat, consistently not fixing problems, and allowing teams to just march up and down the field on them, that's a problem. And so it would take an unreal Christmas miracle level run to, I would say, at least the NFC Championship in order to save Todd Bowles' job at this point in time. But a team that has lost 6 out of 7 games since their bye week, I can't imagine them all of a sudden being able to flip a switch, beat Miami, beat Carolina, and then start the postseason by beating a team, whichever team it is that they face out of the NFC West in that first wild card game on Monday night.
It's so funny to hear you talk about that and reflect Miami side of things where, defensively, that I think they're seventh lowest cash spend on the defensive side of the football this year. Their money's on the offensive side of the ball. Mike McDaniel's an offensive coach, and yet the yards, the points, they're in the 20s. That's where the struggle's been. And so in the same way that Todd Bowles, like the defense is where his bread's been buttered for Miami, it's Mike McDaniel on the offense. And at least when you look at the Dolphins' defensive struggles, you could say, well, they trade Jalen Phillips at the trade deadline. And, well, they're kind of piecemealed together the secondary in July and August with guys off the street and the trade for Minkah Fitzpatrick, who's not going to play in this game. But on the offense, it's where they've made all the marquee signings. It's where they've made they're paying the top dollar guys there. And that's the unit that probably has been the bigger disappointment for me when I reflect on Miami. So I think when you have those kinds of conversations about coaches and hot seats and performances, I'm sure that doesn't help either guy's resume going into this final couple game stretch of evaluation window to know, hey, this is where you're supposed to have your best ownership, and this is where we feel like we're getting let down the most.
Yeah, it's when you hire an offensive genius or a defensive genius, you expect that side of the ball to be the most reliable side of the ball. And when Todd was a defensive coordinator and Bruce was the head coach, that defense was stout. It was dominant, and it just has not been that since the 2021 season when they were eliminated by the Rams in the divisional round. So since then, it has steadily declined, and that coincides with Todd Bowles being elevated from coordinator to head coach.
We're going to get into some of the matchups from a personnel standpoint on this Week 17 showcase between Tampa and Miami at Hard Rock Stadium. Make sure you guys stick with us. We'll be right back. Today's Crossover Thursday is brought to you by Prize Picks. The holiday season is one of the best times for sports. There's bowl games, basketball matchups, playoff pushes, all happening at the same time. And while you make choices every day, the most fun places to do them are the ones where you get paid and you make the right calls on Prize Picks. That is exactly what can happen for you this holiday season. Prize Picks is the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. You can pick more or less on at least 2-player projections, lock in your lineup, and you are in the game. It's simple, fast, and available in 45 states, including Florida. Prize Picks has added an extra layer of excitement for the holiday sports season with their stacks feature, where you can pick the same player up to 3 times in a single lineup, like Baker Mayfield, on more passing yards, touchdowns, and rushing yards, as an example. Now, maybe Quinn Ewers can go over whatever rushing yards they have set for him as well. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL. Get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It is good to be right. James, I have not been able to say a Dolphins quarterback projecting them to go more on the rushing yards all season long. And I just realized, well, that we've Tua Tagovailoa no longer being the starting quarterback. Maybe we will see a quarterback go over the Prize Picks projection for rushing yards in a game.
I mean, they let Tyler Shuck run all over him for, 30 yards a clip. So I don't see any reason why Quinn Ewers couldn't, get the more on his Prize Picks projection there. So that's just another fun part of this Bucs defense that I can't wait to see unfold on Sunday.
So I think that it is a big mystery for Miami, and it was kind of a mystery of their first start that they had against Cincinnati, and Cincinnati very poor in the defensive metrics and rankings, and Ewers passed for 260 yards, but curious to now get a second sampling of him against this Tampa defense, and especially for Mike McDaniel, such a drastic move. What do the passing concepts look like? Do you do some different things and target different areas of the field? We didn't really get any shots down the field to Jalen Waddle in the Cincinnati game. And that's an area where I know Tampa's a little banged up with the cornerback room. So I'm eager to see if they will try to get an isolation and try to take a shot down the field or two with Quinn and see if they can push the ball vertically.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned it. The Bucs are a little banged up. Zion McCollum is not going to play in this game. He's on injured reserve. His regular season is over. And you have second-round pick Benjamin Morrison out there. You have third-round pick Jacob Parrish, but then you still have Jamel Dean out there on the field who has played at a Pro Bowl caliber level. He's an alternate, but yeah, he's been fantastic this year. And for the most part, last week when matched up against Teteroa McMillan, both Parrish and Benjamin Morrison made some great plays, and they were really solid in coverage, which was an encouraging sign moving forward. But Todd Bowles, historically, not great against backup quarterbacks, not great his first go around with rookie quarterbacks or young quarterbacks. So I'm very interested to see how McDaniel decides to attack with Quinn Ewers, because usually, as a defensive coordinator, at least when Todd Bowles sees you once, he's got you. He can figure you out. It's that first time where he's trying to get a feel for it, and he's not great at getting a feel and adjusting in game. So it'll be interesting to see how McDaniel decides to attack the defense.
Where has been the biggest liability for Tampa in the run defense? Because that's been such a big part of what Miami has had their kind of offensive, at least breathing some life into the offense midseason, was getting Devon Achane really rolling. And there's been times where they've gotten him successfully outside the tackles when it is downhill. You saw Jalen Wright a couple weeks ago against the Jets went for 100 yards. So they have some variability to get it going in either case. What has been the most frustrating or vulnerable spot for Tampa defensively against the run?
Yeah, and that's the matchup, Kyle, that I really have circled is this Bucs defense against the run. They've allowed an average of 111 rushing yards per game since the bye week, and this is usually a team that's top 5 in run defense. And I think the biggest part of it is obviously missing Kalijah Cansey. He does play a big role in the run defense, so that hasn't helped. But he's been gone for so long that they should have adjusted by now. I think the biggest problem is number one, really poor tackling by the defense just in general. But if you want to narrow it down further, it's the play of the linebackers. Levante David, he's a Ring of Honor guy. He should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but he's lost 2 steps compared to last year. Mm-hmm. That father time caught him and caught him in a big way. And then Servassier Dennis has just not been the reliable starter that they were hoping he was going to be. That's a guy that battled injuries the first couple of years of his career, was the full-time starter coming into this season because KJ Britt wasn't what they thought he was. And Dennis has been, he's been up and down all season long. He's been a liability in coverage, but then his tackling is just, it's pretty bad. And so these guys are instead of being wrapped up and taken down, they're bouncing off these would-be tacklers and they're picking up an extra 10, 12 yards a clip. And there's no better example than the Patriots game when Travion Henderson busted off 2 different 50-plus yard touchdowns that both should have been tackled within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage.
Yeah. What's a matchup that you think Tampa Bay can really take advantage of in this game?
I want to say attacking the Dolphins secondary. This is a Dolphins pass defense that's worst in the NFL in completion percentage allowed to opposing quarterbacks. They're, bottom quarter, bottom third in touchdowns allowed, yards per attempt, touchdown to interception ratio. You can get after this Dolphins pass defense, but the question is Grizzard going to actually let it fly? You faced a Panthers defense that wasn't good at generating pressure, and they generated a ton of pressure. You didn't push the ball down the field. They had 1 pass attempt of 10 yards or more until the fourth quarter. And when you have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Emeka Egbuka, and Jalen McMillan out there, there's no excuse for that. So was it trying to run the ball and preserve the defense and not allow them on the field? Was it Baker is still playing hurt and you didn't want to try to force him to push the ball down the field? Do you not trust the protection? What is it? But this is a game that you have to win. And if you're going to win this one, you have to be willing to take shots because they're going to be there. I still stand firm in the fact that I don't think there's a single defense in the NFL that can defend against all 4 of those receivers at once. And Grizzard is just not utilizing that. So that's where the Bucs can make up some ground. That's where they can win this thing. But are they willing to take that shot? And I don't know if they are.
Yeah. And I could tell you from having watched the Dolphins defensive structure all season long, they like to play soft and they give up a lot underneath, in part by design, but then there's times where the second level is getting way out of here and your backs and tight ends can really get something rolling. And I know Rashad White's production per reception level is not particularly high. And Kate Otten, I think, is a nice tight end that could be an X factor in this game as far as from a volume perspective. But those are the names that I have circled. So can they lull Miami into tightening up in the middle of the field and then get that look that they want to get that one-on-one with Mike Evans? Because if they can get Mike Evans matched on Jack Jones, and I think Jack Jones has relatively had a really nice November and December up until this past week. He went against T. Higgins in one-on-ones and they got him in isolation and they just got a couple balls in the catch radius and Jack's in pretty good position, but he's not the biggest guy. He's not particularly physical. You can out physical him and you can box him out at the catch point. So that would be, does Tampa look at what T. Higgins did with Jack Jones and look for those matchups with Mike Evans and say, hey, we're going to get some chunks by taking some shots? Because if they do, I think they will have their fair share of chunk plays in the passing game.
Yeah, it's just whether or not we finally see Grizzard, and that was the biggest thing, was you finally have all these pieces, man. You finally have these 4 receivers plus Bucky plus Cade. Why are you not trying to take advantage of that? And it's started making me question whether or not Grizzard was ready for this OC job, and if I was giving him a little too much leeway because of the injuries earlier in the year. So it's I don't hear them talking about running the ball 30 times in this game quite yet, the way they did heading into Carolina, but we'll see how they decide to approach this one.
We will have some game predictions on the other side of a brief break. Make sure you guys stick with us here, Crossover Thursday. Kyle Krabs, Locked On Dolphins, James Yarcho, Locked On Bucs, and I would be a horrible host, James, if I didn't give you the chance first, give you the floor. Give me a game prediction, give me a bold prediction, something that you think you can plant the flag on and say, I think this is going to happen on Sunday.
Wow. I think this is going to be, for anyone in their fantasy championship that has Devon Achane, I'd like to be the first to congratulate you on winning your fantasy league. I think this is going to be the Devon Achane game. And not only because he's such a good running back and the Bucs have just struggled in stopping the run, since the bye week, but because he is so explosive and he's a danger out of the backfield in the receiving game. And the Bucs have just not had an answer for running backs in the passing game this season. Jahmyr Gibbs destroyed them. You had Bijan Robinson destroyed them twice. You've had Travion Henderson destroyed. Like it's been nonstop. So, when I was speaking to Julian of Locked On Panthers, he said, I don't see how the Bucs can lose to Miami with Quinn Ewers being the quarterback. I said, they absolutely can, because the Dolphins don't need Quinn Ewers to win this game. They just need Devon Achane. And I think he's in for a massive, massive game. And that's really going to be able to give Miami control of the tempo. It's going to force the Bucs to be one-dimensional, and I think that's something that they'll be able to take advantage of. So that's my prediction, is that Achane is going to be just an absolute force on Sunday.
I selfishly want to see it for the obvious reasons, but also the fact that he's 106 yards away from the second highest single season rushing total in Dolphins franchise history. Like, he's been on that kind of pace. He ain't going to catch Ricky Williams had 1853 back in 2002. He's not going to touch that, but he has a chance to pass 2003 Ricky Williams with 106 rushing yards. So it's been a really special season for him. Was named to the Pro Bowl on Tuesday, so it was a great accolade for him. I think that's a great call out, because so much of the Dolphins offense runs through Devon Achane. So probably a safe bet there. I would say the first team that logs a turnover is going to win the game. And more often than not, unfortunately, those scripts have not been kind to Miami. If you lose a possession, well, Miami had this stretch where Mike McDaniel for 3 years, he deferred every time he won the coin toss. And then they were struggling offensively and they started taking the coin toss. And then if you lose a possession in the first half, and if Mike McDaniel knows they're going to get the ball to start the second half and we've now lost a possession, things kind of snowball on them, right? Like, it gets a little weird. We kind of get away from some things that are working. We start playing with a little bit more urgency, and mistakes compound. And it's been a really frustrating common thread, really, for Miami in the Mike McDaniel era. So if Miami is able to have that early rushing success, and then Tampa has a turnover and Miami can parlay that into a lead, I think that's the game script. Like that's how they take care of business in the games that they've won this year. But if the Bucs get the first turnover and Mike feels the pressure of two score difference early with a young quarterback, I think it will force Miami back into some bad habits, and it will lead to tipping the scales in Tampa's favor.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And as far as winning the coin toss, the Bucs have kind of bounced back and forth. It seems like typically they would defer. That was their style. But when they felt that the offense needed a jump start, they did, take the ball first recently and marched right down the field and scored. What the offense did after that, we won't talk about. But yeah, I kind of feel like, the Bucs are in a similar situation, and you saw it snowball for them against Carolina. You have the ball, you have the lead. It's a 2-minute drill. You have all 3 of your timeouts to be able to march down the field and add to it before getting the second half kickoff. And instead, you go 3 and out, you give it to the Panthers, and all of a sudden, Tenero McMillan's in the end zone. And now you're coming out in the second half facing a deficit instead of a multi-score lead. So it's Kyle, this is the winner of this team is going to be whichever one looks like the more competent football team. And to me, it's a complete toss-up. Like, both of these teams are just they're trying so hard to not succeed, and it boggles my mind.
Yeah, it's just two hosts oozing with confidence for their football team here as we go through here. I had another prediction for this game. Any Dolphins sacks in this game will come from the inside linebackers or the defensive tackles. You will pitch a shutout on the edge. The Dolphins have had a really frustrating stretch where Bradley Chubb had he didn't play particularly well in the first month, but he had 3 sacks in the first month. He had a performance incentive at 6 sacks. He got that. It's been really quiet since for Bradley Chubb. You know, his best game was the first game after Jalen Phillips got traded at the trade deadline. And it's been a disappointing couple of weeks for him. Chop Robinson has got split a sack with Kenneth Grant in this past game that they played against the Bengals, but it was Burrow trying to step up in the pocket. Chop is far too often getting rode past the top of the arc and is playing behind the quarterback, where the defensive tackles, there's been a lot of focus on the chemistry of the twists and the stunts and the games that you can play. And they have 3 rookies that are playing meaningful snaps. Now, Zach Sealer's come alive. He's logged a sack in 3 consecutive games on the interior. I know Tampa Bay's a little banged up on the inside, but I will say these Bucs offensive tackles will pitch a shutout against Miami's edge rushers as far as pressures and sacks in this game.
Yeah, and every Bucs fan listening to this just started like twitching a little bit because all of the pressure has been coming from the interior because Cody Mauch is not out there, because Ben Bredesen is not out there, and you're dealing with these backup guards, and it has stunted the growth of Graham Barton as a center this season.
He played some time at tackle this year too, didn't he?
Yeah, opened the season at tackle when Tristan Wirfs wasn't playing. So, all of those things combined, that's where all the pressure is coming. That's why you're not seeing Baker push the ball down the field as often as you would probably like. It's why he's had some turnover problems. It's why he's been sacked. And so if that's the strength of the Dolphins pass rush going up against the weakness of the Bucs protection, it's going to be a really, really long day for Baker Mayfield and this Buccaneers offense. Yeah,
it's be a good litmus test for these young Miami defensive tackles. So that'll be a matchup that I have circled. James, any parting thoughts before we get out of here?
It's a game that I was excited for when the schedule came out, and now I'm excited to watch just to see what direction are these teams going, because I feel like I know where the Bucs are going. I feel like they're going into a new era of Buccaneers football, but do they have enough in the tank to try to still make the postseason and give themselves a puncher's chance with a win on Sunday? Other than that, just a Merry Christmas to everybody watching and listening, man. Like, thanks for joining us on a Christmas edition of Crossover Thursday. Really appreciate everyone out there.
Absolutely. And we thank you all again for helping to make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. And those of you who are probably tuning in on Christmas Day are a large part of the reason why that is the case. Our everydayers, we appreciate each and every one of you. I'm Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins. He's James Yarcho, host of Locked On Bucs. It is your teams every day. We don't just say it, we live it. When you're done the crossover, all of your favorite sports teams, we have a show. And then in the immediate aftermath of this game between the Bucs and the Dolphins, make sure you check out the podcast feed, the YouTube channels. We will have you covered wall to wall. We appreciate you tuning in, and we hope you all have a very happy holiday.